IPL, which is a sport, IPL is measured in terms of the valuation it generates, in terms of revenue it generates, not for the cricketing genius it produces. Say A.R. Rahman is the best music director. Of course, he is one of the best, but not for the kind of music he provides, but because he charges more money. He is the most sought after and is more paid. So, if you go to any aspiring youth and ask him who is your ideal, most of the times you hear the name of Ambani or Bill Gates because they are rich. Let me put it this way in a simple way. We have the richest god Kubera, but no one worships Kubera. This is not the land of birth because we know the limitations of only being rich. This moksha is again through fulfilling your artha and kama. So your artha is also part of attaining the moksha, what actually you are aspiring for. It cannot be a goal in itself. Artha at the most can be the means.
So money as a tool instead of being a goal. Namaste. Welcome to my conversations, which I've been doing for quite some time, coming back after a long break. My guest today is Vishnuji. Vishnuji has just joined us in Saryu Trust to take on writing history, and we have a project under the guidance of my mentor and friend Shankar Bharadwaj Khandavali. The project that we are doing with Shankar is called Dharma Rajya, and we have a team in Saryu Trust and some people from outside. There is Brahat participating, and some people from Brahat are also helping us in take forward this project as a collaboration. Vishnuji is in Dharma Rajya project going to be writing on cultural economy.
Yeah.
And generally economy has been an interest for me. I have over the years become a free markets advocate, if you like, and Milton Friedman and his Shishya Thomas Sowell are my people I look up to for economics. Of course, Sanjeev Sanyal has massively influenced my thinking on economics. So we'll cover hopefully some of these subjects today with Vishnuji as we start off. So Vishnuji, first question: what is really the endeavor of Dharma Rajya, for if you share with the listeners?
Dharma Rajya, if you put it simply, designing a state where state enables the people to fulfill their potential rather than state defining what a nation should do. So it becomes important in the present context because we have a state, we have a state and a state document which instead of reflecting the will of the nation, which actually defines how a nation should run. So 75 years into the independence, we have seen the results, and in fact any system for that matter after in operation for a while takes stock how it is performing, how it is doing, and makes necessary corrections. But unfortunately the kind of documents we have created post independence some of prevent that activity. So this entire Dharma Rajya project is an attempt in that direction where we can revisit how we fared in the last 75 years, whether there is something that needs to be corrected, and course correct. You can call it a course correction and forward-looking document.
Thank you. For the listeners, I'll elaborate a little bit of my understanding of Dharma Rajya, and Vishnuji, please correct me. So Vishnuji spoke about the fulfilling the potential of people. The worldview where dharma comes from is that we are all born to fulfill in an endless journey of life and birth. We are born to express something in this current body, via this current body, some leaning, some proclivities, and the only purpose of society and a state should be to allow me express my proclivities, my leanings, whatever would be evolution and growth for me.
Exactly.
And instead you're saying that the state is trying to impose on the people values which are
Let's put it this way, Rahul. Every human being innately craves happiness.
Craves
This
happiness.
is
Yeah.
everyone to see. But what actually the way, whether state's role is to make everyone happy or enable people so that they can become happy by themselves.
With their own endeavors, own
Exactly.
purushartha.
As it stands today, state has taken up the responsibility of seeing to it that it is my responsibility that I will provide roti, kapda, makan to every individual so that they will be happy. We are not yet clear whether roti, kapda, makan will make an individual happy, every individual happy. So certain assumptions that are not well founded have been made in the state policies, documents, theories. So as a result, we ended up today wherein all this needs to be re-looked upon.
Okay, nice. So state's goal is not to ensure that everybody is happy in whatever definition it has for its in its own vision of what happiness may be, which by the state's definition is perhaps roti, kapda, or makan. There may be more to happiness and
Obviously.
self-expression.
See, Raoji, let me put it this way. Most of the policies or theories are based on certain assumptions. First theory evolves, then it is put into practice. So, the kind of assumptions the theory is made. Say, for example, take the example of US. We have a concept called social security.
Yes.
Why does US state provide social security? Because it believed that it is the responsibility of the state to take care of the individual. But is it really the case? And this state taking the responsibility of individual has its roots. Perhaps you might have heard about Maslow's hierarchy of
You wanted
needs.
to speak about it today.
Okay, he is one of the perhaps closest who came to our thinking, Indian way of thinking. Then there he relied on. First, there are some basic needs, then safety needs, then after that, this is a pyramid. It is not a stratification. So everyone has to go through this pyramid. So once this pyramid is made, and at the end of at the top of the pyramid, if you have self-actualization, that which more or less coincides with happiness, then state started believing that it is my responsibility to provide all this to an individual. Whereas in reality, in the society, it's a human endeavor. Human will choose whatever needed to him. He can pick up from where some people may not really bothered about safety needs and other needs. They can directly lap into the spiritual need. So, state as it stands today, for completely become oblivious of all these things and starts from the basic. I have to provide these basic needs. It's my responsibility, so that I will do this.
Let's just stay with Maslow's. We discussed this yesterday briefly because we've touched upon the topic. You said something that it is a pyramid, so I have to, as an individual, go through this entire hierarchy. And a lot of Hindus, a lot of Indians have started believing this as well. That first, when my basic needs are met, only then I can go to higher order thinking. That we discussed yesterday is not true.
Isn't it there for everyone to see? Is it everyone is like that? So it is not necessary. Basic needs need to be met. The state has to enable so that an individual can acquire his basic needs. State, today what we see in the name of what do you call ASAP Yojana, hai na? Pradhan Mantri Garib Yojana, Makan Yojana, and all this. Why should any state build a house for a person? You enable him so that he can take care of himself.
How would one enable?
Provide the means so that he can survive in the society. Don't hinder him.
Okay.
So create opportunities, or you need not directly give him a house. You give him employment opportunities, or he can survive on his own so that he can build his own house.
Give us a glimpse of, because you come from looking at what worked for Bharata, India over thousands of years. And so we are trying to look at what had worked for us, what has broken down, and the state we are in and what we might want to get back to. What worked for us is what we are trying to rediscover, perhaps in the Dharmarajya project. So, give us a glimpse of how might be. I mean, weren't Rajas taking care of people, building things, building homes for them, providing for people, or is
No,
not
Rajas
the
never
role
did
of-
it directly.
Never did.
Rajas never did it directly. So, whatever the concept of social welfare today we have is, it has its roots in Western theories.
Okay.
So, for example, how West saw human being, how we saw human being, how West addressed the economic problems it had, how we solve those problems. A proper understanding of these two will make you understand why we are doing this project at all. So, over the years, what West has created is an economic culture.
Economic culture.
What we are proposing is a cultural economy. What we always had and what we are proposing today is also cultural economy. How do these two differ? That these two differ in a large extent. Say, for example, in economic culture, everything is centered around economy. Everything is measured in terms of money. Everything is measured in terms of the utility it provides. Rather, it becomes completely oblivious of aesthetics a person as an individual always pursues.
Correct.
So, for example, if I have to put it this way, say A.R. Rahman is the best music director. Of course, he is one of the best, but not for the kind of music he provides, but because he charges more money. He is the most sought after and is more paid. Again, in terms of money, you measure the success of a musician. And temple is a revenue generating source. It is not a cultural enriching center anymore. That is how you pit one Shirdi against the Tirumala and how much hundi is this collecting. IPL, which is a sport, IPL is measured in terms of the valuation it generates, in terms of revenue it generates, not for the cricketing genius it produces. So every aspect of life has been measured only in terms of money.
Entire countries, entire people,
Exactly.
judgment, everything on how much you earn.
If you are successful, then you should be rich. Only rich are successful. So if you go to any aspiring youth and ask him who is your ideal, most of the times you hear the name of Ambani or Bill Gates because they are rich. Let me put it this way in a simple way. We have the richest god Kubera, but no one worships Kubera. This is not the land of God because we know the limitations of only being rich. But unfortunately, it has been imposed on us. Whereas in cultural economy, your economy is a byproduct of the culture you create. If I have to give an example, you build a temple. Around temple, there is lots of economic activity. Most of the people find their employment. They lead their livelihood. And similarly, you create so many festivals. No other civilization celebrates as many festivals as we do. And every festival is an economic activity. So, in a cultural economy, you build a culture, your focus is more on culture, your focus is more on enabling an individual to fulfill his potential. And as a result, the economy comes out. Whereas in economic culture, your main aim is to, so even today, a country's performance is measured in terms of GDP. We are aspiring $5 trillion GDP. We don't know whether after reaching $5 trillion GDP, every individual is happy. We cannot ensure or we cannot assure that. So this is the crux of the difference. Once we understand these differences, then we have to understand what actually led to these two principles, those two ideas.
And this whole difference at the root of it comes from the space that, and I'm reasserting this or re-asking this question, it comes from a space that we are basically divine beings on a journey of evolution of some sort of an evolution of separatedness to the true moksha, and that is the essence of who we are. And the worldview that a Hindu state needs to have is perhaps this as a key differentiator. Could you elaborate this a little bit more, please?
As you rightly pointed out, we are all aspiring. One say it is moksha, one say it is going back to where you have come from. Whichever it is. Our ancestors, our rishis gave it our Chaturveda Purushartha. We called it Dharma, Artha, Kama, and finally the moksha. But this moksha is again through fulfilling your Artha and Kama. So your artha is also part of attaining the moksha, what actually you are aspiring for. It cannot be a goal in itself. Artha at the most can be the means. So
Money as a tool instead of
it is
being a goal.
Exactly. So if we redefine the or we start conceptualizing a human being like this, then our theories that evolve also reflect these ideas. Let me explain you like this, Rahulji. How does the modern economic theories, be it capitalist or Marxist, how do they view a human being? They say a human being essentially is a rational economic man. So the very definition of human
Rational economic man.
economic man. So what are we saying? So his existence is integrally intertwined with the economic activity he does or economic accomplishes he makes. Is it really the case? Does it imply, is it the case with all the rich people being happy? So of course West kept on evolving its theories. Say then they started saying that he is an economic man. At the same time, every human being seeks happiness. And how did they formulate their problem? So since every human being seeks happiness, I am taking this from S.N. Balagangadhara, who explained it brilliantly. If he dug deeper into their assumptions. So every human being seeks happiness. And how does happiness is arrived? Happiness is because a human has again, another definition the economists of Western economists give is a human being is a bundle of desires. So there are two aspects. There is an economic man, there is a human being who is full of desires. And with these two they combine, every human being seeks happiness. And happiness is achieved only when all the desires are fulfilled. But is it really possible? So they started making claims about human being, about happiness, about desires without getting deeper into that. How do we differ? How do we view human being? So we also say the same thing. Every human being craves happiness. And there is a part of desires, there is a part of happiness. But we started defining everything minutely. So we have this story of Yayati, who takes up his son's youth and then starts to enjoy his world. And finally, one day he finally concludes, you can never satisfy these desires. It is as if you are pouring ghee into the abyss. If you satisfy one desire, it will lead to the other. So that is how our ancestors, even Manusmriti, which we despise so much these days, before getting into the practicalities, before getting into the suggestive mode, it first lays down a whole framework, how the creation is created, how the people have come, what human aspires. Then it defines what actually is we meant by desire. Sankalpa Mulaha Kamaiva Yajna. So you are there in the Sankalpa, I have understood you, the desire, so I know how to deal with you. So when you understand the nature of the desire, nature of the human being, it becomes easier for a human being to achieve the happiness he is looking for. Rather than going for trial and error method, okay, let me fulfill this desire, let me try whether I am happy, okay, I am not happy, then I cultivate another desire, I fulfill it. And our rishis simply put it, there is in Shanti Parva there is a sloka wherein says, Kama janami te moolam. Hey Kama, I know your root. Sankalpatvam hi jaise. You are born out of the sankalpa. So if I want to be happy, I'll deal the way you are. My sankalpas are aimed in a dharmic way so that it will ultimately lead me to the moksha I am aspiring to. So if desires are not properly channelized, they'll end you up in a mess. Desire is essential, desire is there. But if you understand the nature of desire and act accordingly, that is what our ancestors, our rajas did. That will take you in a different direction and make you realize your goal.
So is the goal, and maybe this is a little deviation, is the goal of curbing desire, or is the goal of, what do you mean the nature of desire?
Actually, curbing desire is not the solution. You have to understand the nature of the desire.
What does that mean?
The desire by nature, as IIT pointed out, the nature of desire is it will get even more augmented if you try to satisfy it.
Okay. So
So
keep
then-
trying to satisfy it, it gets even more augmented.
Exactly.
So much
do-
money now, more money.
More
now,
money
it's
now.
always, or more sexual activity, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you understand that nature of the desire, then you will come to a state where you will understand that and say, okay, since I cannot fulfill, there is a limitation on my part to fulfill all the desires, then I will check out which desire will lead me to the right direction. It is not essential. If you curb the desires, there is no economic activity, to be honest. Everyone becoming monk is not the solution here. But pursuing desires in a dharmic way. So we say dharmasya moolam artha. So the root for dharma is artha. So
The
artha
root
is
for dharma is artha,
artha.
which means the foundation of dharma is on artha.
Artha.
Is that
Exactly.
correct?
Artha is a tool.
As a tool, okay.
Artha is a tool, and artha, through your artha, by fulfilling your artha in a dharmic way, you will attain moksha. This is a simple equation.
As Professor Kapil Kapoor, in one conversation, I was having a dialogue on this. He says that, I was arguing about something, and I said, okay, but the Char Purusharth also talk about chasing artha, but he said they are always bracketed by dharma and moksha. Remember that. All your artha and kama are bracketed by dharma and moksha. It's a very nice way of
It is
putting
rightly put forth by Shri Guruji of the second Satsanga Chalaka of RSS when he says, the design we have is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. It is like a river. It is a river whose banks are dharma and moksha, and the river is flowing in artha and kama. If artha and kama cross their boundaries, there will be a flood. It will be devastating. So artha and kama are to be pursued within the boundaries of dharma and moksha. So with this understanding, we lay down our policies.
The state you are saying, or the Dharma Rajya project, basically says that the state must also have an understanding of this framework of thinking, and then design all institutions, its ideas, its theories, and and finally the institutions, whether it is education or policing or economy, according to this framework of looking at the nature of man, and this framework of dharma, artha, kama.
Whatever policies you make should be aligning the natural craving of human being, not to interfere into human being,
not to interfere,
and not to take up the onus of lifting him up. At the most, state can provide the means so that he can do by himself. This is the bottom line. Why we again repeatedly have to compare ourselves with the West? Because whatever policies today we see are more or less all over the world are influenced by the Western theories, Western economic policies. But we have to also give credit to the West because it is a natural evolution for the West, whereas it was a complete deviation in our case. So if we can understand how we managed our economy and the factors of production, whatever we call, and how they did that, a proper understanding of that will make you understand the entire concept a little.
I just got this little clarity, and which is why I started quickly writing also. I've been a big fan over the years, become a big fan of, starting because of Sanjeev Sanyal and leading up to Milton Friedman. And of course, Sanjeev Sanyal is not a very big fan of free market economics as defined by Milton Friedman. I don't quite understand it. My understanding of economy, it's very interesting, but it's also very nascent. But I just got this insight. The Friedman thinking is about almost very similar to what you're saying, that the state's responsibility is not to uplift people, it is not to provide for people, just get the state out of the way. Like the video we were seeing on India's handloom, state of India's handloom, and how interference by subsidizing different pieces of what the government believes is good for the people, it actually ends up interfering and keeping industries alive artificially. Yeah, just so that they don't die, because it feels that it is its responsibility, and all good intentions. And like Friedman says that road to hell is paved on
good intentions.
on the road of good intentions. So what the difference that insight came to me is that on one side, Friedman is saying free markets allow businesses, economies, industrialists, people, and the competitiveness of business figure out the welfare of people automatically. It is an automatic outcome, he says, because of market economics, because of
Market
competitiveness
operating on its own.
without government interference. What you are, I think the key distinction you mentioned is uh, the creating culture, which in one earlier conversation I know you mentioned during your earlier talk on history of India, on invasions on India that you've done for us at Sangam Talks. You talked about that the invaders were only after destroying our civilization, but our kings
building our
were
economy.
also responsible for not only fighting them but creating our civilization.
Exactly.
That was very powerful, but I don't quite understand that, and I'm trying to connect that dot of creating civilization and creating culture. Am I drawing a good
It is
conclusion,
Yeah, of course.
or the connection?
That's a very fair point in the sense that whoever attacking us, they had only one mission, to conquer us, and it is a military machine. Whereas on the other hand, our kings had to take care of its subjects. So building economy, building civilization, and protecting its people. All this is happening at the same time. They were fighting with the enemy. Coming back to what Milton Friedman said.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman, I haven't read much about him, but going by whatever he said is right. State has got no business to interfere in the lives of the economic life of the at least. Let markets take their own course. This is what capitalism more or less ideally preaches in principle or in theory. But is it the case?
I mean, that's what he argues for, that it is not the case, and he continues to argue for that only, that the government has to get out of the way and government should be limited to only defense, law and order, policing, and perhaps he says managing epidemics. Those are the only 2, 3, 4 activities he talks about. He says it must get out of the way. How? I mean, of course.
Now compare this with how our Rajas, how our state dealt with economy. Okay, as I said, there were 2 pillars of the economy in our system. There was Raja, who was protecting all his subjects, which includes Vaishya community, who was creating wealth. So Vaishyas were bestowed with or given the responsibility of creating wealth. Raja is just supposed to protect them. And what were these Vaishyas supposed to do with the wealth they created? So if even today the practice is there. They used to build temples. They used to engage in dharmic activities, which again creates an economic cycle wherein people are employed, where people get employment, where people engage in business. And there is very little chance of these two coming together because the other 2 sections are also there, Kshatriya and Brahmana and Shudra, production class as well as the knowledge class. What is happening in modern day capitalism is there very little checks and balances, very few checks and balances between the ruler and the business class colluding. Are we not witnessing that?
There are very few checks and balances between
In the new system, the modern system,
between the
to
politician
prevent
and the
ruling class, state,
and the business.
people. Are we not witnessing this? Very few handful of business people in America dictate the policies around the world. So this would have been prevented in the Dharmarajya. How? Again, the clear-cut responsibilities assigned to each of the classes.
The king's role is to protect the Vaishya, and like Sanjeev Sanyal says, Chanakya writes in Arthashastra, to not let Matsya Nyaya happen.
Law of jungle.
Law of the jungle. Not let that happen. So the big fish is eating small fish, and that is the only role of a Raja.
Exactly.
And then the Vaishya community is figuring out all economy on its own, basically.
Not just Vaishya community,
And
Vaishya
they are
community in connection, in complementarity with the production.
With the
class.
production, with the Shudra community, which of course Shudra term has become much maligned, but of course it is not
It is as sacred as Brahmana is.
as sacred as Brahmana is. Yeah, okay. So the Vaishya and Shudra communities are driving the economy and the cultural economy, all of the work of art, temples, construction, building, metallurgy, all of this is being driven by largely by these two communities. And the king, the Kshatriyas, are not getting influenced by
The business
the
people.
business people,
By the business
because they have their own objectives, their own guilds, and they're driving it.
They went overseas, they were doing business. All the Raja was doing is to protect their assets from external attacks as well as internal attacks from the thieves. That is what he used to do. Set the law and order in place so that everyone can pursue his goal freely.
Very nice. And there they were influenced not, or they were trained to be influenced not by money, but by the Brahmanas who are actually giving them a higher pursuit to chase.
True, very true. For both the people, even the Vaishyas and Kshatra,
The
the
Brahmanas
higher goal is already clearly stated.
Clearly stated.
Vedanta go brahmanasya kshatriyo vijayi bhavet vaishyo dhana samruddhatha shudha sukamavapniyat.
What does it mean?
This is actually the falashruti of Vishnu Sahasranama. More or less, this is what people aspire for. Kshatriya always needs to be Vijaya. He needs to conquer. He will win over the territories.
So his
and
nature
establish
is
that.
to win
Win.
and fight and war.
Whereas Brahmana is after Vedanta, whereas Vaishya is after wealth creation, Shudra is after Sukha. They want to be happy. And all this four automatically happens when Raja, or all the four classes do pursue their goals without any fear. And setting such a fearless environment is the duty of the Raja. There ends his business.
So in this worldview, the providing for, firstly, this whole notion of oppressed classes falls apart. I mean, it doesn't even exist in the framework of the
Can I interrupt
Chaturvarna
you,
system.
Rahulji?
Yes.
See, since you talked about this oppressed classes, social
Yeah.
order and everything, again let's go back a little into the history of how the West solved its economic problems and how we solved it. Let's go back, repeatedly go back to that place. What are the economic factors that we have to address? Basically, let's assume there is a manpower problem. That is what actually, even today we find, we are searching for the ways how to better to the effective use, most effective use. So how did the West evolve? In the ancient times when there were Greek, Roman civilization, there were slaves. So slaves were completely, kind of, we all know the kind of atrocities that were, that slaves were subjected to. But then from slaves there was resentment because people can not live in longer in slavery. So there
Either
was resentment.
slaves or serfdom, just
Then
but the
from
order.
slaves to serfdom. The difference between slaves and serfdom is at least serf was supposed to own a piece of land. Whether he was cultivating his land or not is a different issue.
Okay.
In slavery, there was no ownership, whereas in serfdom, they had some piece of land, but they were forced to cultivate their land only after they cultivated the land of their landlord.
Feudals,
So,
yeah.
feudals. So, from slavery to serfdom, then to peasant, then he got his piece of land and he was doing his work. Then from there, post-enlightenment ideals in the Europe, this colonization happened. So they got colonies, and again in colonies they got slaves, and again they slowly moved to capitalism, wherein today we'll end up in the present-day employment. There is a clear-cut evolution in the case of West, from slave to serf to peasant to employment, which is a natural evolution, which is a betterment of the previous system.
Okay.
Okay. How did we manage our manpower? We never had slaves. It is, it is written all over. No historian ever claimed that India had the slavery system.
Yeah.
Our manpower is again in our social order. We had kulavrutis, we had jatis. So there was no such case wherein a person was unemployed ever. By birth, he had some employment to pursue. And these units, small, closely knit units, were producing something. So we never had this evolution kind of thing. We always had people were pursuing. Take the example of an artisan. So artisan was doing his work, And at the same time, we have the scope of fulfilling his innate craving or creative genius. Just look at any temple in the country. Go to South India or North India. Look at all the sculptures you come across. They are beautiful indeed,
Beautiful.
right?
Yes.
Now
Masterpieces
let
of
me
art.
ask you a simple question. Let's assume a society which has oppressed at least 60% of its population for 2000 years.
Can it ever
Is it possible?
produce
Can it ever produce such marvels?
Kailasnath temple
Who produced?
built out of a rock
And think of this. Think of
without
it this way.
computer vision, with nothing? It's mind-boggling how anybody would be. And
which
over some few hundred years.
And no, which community sculpted this? Was it Brahmanas? Was it Kshatriyas? Was it Vaishyas?
It was the Shudra community which sculpted it.
Then how can even we claim that Shudras were oppressed for longer period of time? No, nowhere in the history. At no point in time in the history this actually happened. But somehow we got why. Again, the way we looked at our society is colonial. If I'm not preaching you too much.
No. It reminds me of my conversation with Anuradha Goyal, a friend of mine who's one of India's biggest travel bloggers. She mentioned that, we have this idea of Kabir, that he was a very poor Jolaha working with iron, coming from a very poor family. She says actually that is not true. The Jolahas in the 14th, 15th century, 16th centuries were actually very rich. Kabir possibly belonged to a very rich family. It has become fashionable for us to show, when you want to have a spiritual figure, you show them, they live in absolute abject poverty. All of this. So it was very powerful, I thought, and that's what.
And again, that is a very good case study for us why Maslow's pyramid is not universal, at least does not apply, at least in this land. Somebody who already belonged to a completely a poor man can directly transition to the level of self-actualization, wherein a rich man completely renounces everything and lands up there.
Once again, reminds me of a conversation with Madhu Keshwar ji. She said, she talks about Nut community. See, in Delhi, I think the Nut community comes from Rajasthan largely. You see them doing performances and some brilliant acrobatics on roadsides at red lights and all of this, right? I wish there was a full gymnastics center to take them. They would, if trained from that childhood, they would beat the world's biggest gymnasts. So she says that we have reduced the Nut community, which survives on bhiksha, to being bhikaris. That is how they lived. It was bhiksha to pursue whatever they did. But what we started calling is bhik in a derogatory manner, that they are not productive, don't want to work, and so they ask for money. That sort of reminds me of that, and we had that conversation. If you want to add a few points.
Exactly. This is again comes from the same assumption that every human being has to go certain ladder. So if their profession is to bhik mangna, I don't know how derogatory it is. Bhiksha is a proper word.
Yes.
And if they are happy getting their bhiksha and pursuing their passion, which is quite okay. State should not interfere in his life and ask him, "Oh, you should get rich."
Yeah, or be productive, or whatever.
Be productive. Seriously.
Yeah. Bhik is wrong.
Exactly. And more or less, even if we have sannyasis.
But sorry, I'm interrupting you. You see, the whole filter of looking at people has become so derogatory, which is what Madhuji was trying to point out too, that that is a normal pursuit of that person's life. Maybe their happiness is in that.
Exactly.
And we keep imposing, aap kaam kyun nahi karte, on them. What if they don't want to? They want to pursue something. Of course, the right place to pursue their art is not on roadsides. Maybe we've taken away perhaps spaces for them to perform and express their art.
That is what state could have done actually. That is what I mean by enablement. You need not, everything cannot be measured in terms of productivity. So, yeah, if you are not productive, you have no place in, it is not
employed.
Not employed. He is productive in his own sense basically, because what a human aspires for is not just money or resources. Some sort of aesthetics makes him happy basically. Yeah. So the discourse on aesthetics is completely missing in the modern discourse basically. Yeah. Everything is utilitarian. If you are doing something, what is there, what is that it produces, how is it accounted for? If it is not accounting for in terms of money, it is not, it is a useless activity.
So Vishnuji, The other thing we've done, and there is this whole battle also, political battle raging on the ish thing of employment. Modi ji talked about पकौड़े वाला बन जाओ, है ना, कुछ हुआ था कि अपना काम खुद करो.
Yeah, pakado wale.
And there was complete derogatory conversations on TV channels, national TV and all of that पकौड़े वाला बनवाना चाहते हैं. The point he was saying is that there is enough business out there. Be on your own feet, be independent rather than constantly seeking government to provide for jobs.
Exactly.
We've not been a nation like that. Even today's culture, you go and offer a job to somebody who's selling an anda on the roadside or selling a bansuri. The person, I don't know, somehow I think that it's been fed and drained and hammered into our heads that we need a job. Hammered into our heads. And that actually is harming at least the Hindus in a very bad way. Instead of being entrepreneurs in fixing ACs to small things and all of that, everybody seeks a government job. And intuitively it feels to me that this is not who we are.
This never was the case actually. So the employment culture, the capitalistic model with which the employment culture has crept into our system. So even if you rightly said when you use the term independent, so we have provided a situation where in our employment culture either you have to be secured or you will be independent. You cannot be both.
You have to be secure or you have
You
to
can
be
get either security
or
you can get
independence.
independence.
Both nahi ho
not
sakta.
both. How many times we hear this
Constant.
conversation?
I've been a businessman and I know that this insecurity I've had to deal with people in my family. Of course, my father comes from a business background, so it was better. But otherwise, I know in all my families around.
And most of people, my friends are employed. So always they say they are not satisfied with the kind of job. They are not providing, contributing anything independently, but they have to obey the orders of the boss because they have to keep the wealth maximization of the organization for which they work, not his fulfillment. But okay, let me quit this, then he's lost his security. So either you can have only one of this, either security or independence.
What is the alternate?
Alternative is like what we had, enabling every profession, wherein say for example, a guy, it again boils down to the kind of classification you do in the society. So everyone need not be an employee. Today we have created a caste called employee caste. We have the largest caste in the country today. So it need not be so. So you can have different people pursuing their vocations with great dignity, and at the same time, that is how the marvelous creativity has come up. Say for example, I'm not an advocate of the ancient system, I'm not even advocating the ancient system should come back. But let's understand how they worked with the things, how they managed the human resources. So, say for example, in a potter or blacksmith or a goldsmith gets into his profession by the age of 10, 12, and by the end of 16 years, he will have enough hands on his work, and he's not worried about his employment being lost because he's sure of getting his roti kapda makan ko jitna chahiye. And after that, by the age of 20, he would start pursuing something to excel. What actually our ancient system provided and what today will lack. I'm not saying that there was no excellence in the Western countries, but the excellence they have a Leonardo, they have a Picasso, whoever it was. But excellence in the West was in spite of their systems. It was an occasional, random excellence, whereas we have systematized excellence. So here excellence comes naturally because you have had hands-on experience with the work you do. By the age of 20, you start pursuing something to create greater in your own field, get acknowledged by the own people. So the genius has come up and there is ample scope for that to come up. Whereas in the West, it was in spite of the systems they had in place, not because of the systems they had in place. So this distinction between...
Beautifully put. Really beautifully put. Once again, I'm joining so many dots. I was trying to write this and I will read this out to you. In trying to do a project with Dr. J.K. Bajaj, who's done one of the most important work on demographics in the country and how change has been happening in district-wise and all. So at Sario, we are trying to do some data project with him to take forward his work, for which it seems there is no Uttaradhikari, a brilliant work. So I just met him 2-3 weeks back, and in a conversation, I mentioned to him that there is just too much mediocrity everywhere, sir. And he started laughing, and he says that his real problem with secularism is not about Hindutva or Hindu Rashtra or none of this. His real problem is, and these are his words, and I paraphrase. Actually. My biggest problem with secularism is that it does not allow us to teach our people about the greatness of the civilization we had, and therefore does not allow for giving its current people a purpose for rebuilding it. With no such grand purpose, India has been reduced to mediocrity. Beautifully put, right?
Nicely put.
And he talks about a philosopher called Ferdinand Braudel, who does a comparison between China and India. A French philosopher, Braudel, and it seems, I couldn't find this piece of reference, but he was quoting him. And once again, I'll have to paraphrase. That it seems that Ferdinand, this Braudel, talks about that China. It seems, he says that why did China progress and why has India been left to the economic mess it is in, is because the Chinese were able to put up posters in their factories that we will do the work of 10 years in 1 year to rebuild the China of yore. And the elite of China had a clear sense of purpose of rebuilding the civilization. And compared to them, India has no such purpose. This is Braudel talking about in his book on civilization.
The last sentence is very, very important when he said the elite of the China were hell bent on rebuilding their civilization, whereas we were busy copying or aping the others. And today, you see this paradox, Rahul. I'm just carrying on from where I left about this independence and job security. See, today, in the name of pursuing education and making education compulsory for every child, okay, so our education lasts till the age of 21. By the time one completes master, the most fruitful years, he has been parasite on the society. Are we ever understanding it? He is not contributing anything. Even in the true terms of productivity, he is not contributing anything. So, this was definitely never the case with our systems. The learning happens and earning also happens and contributing also happens.
And we brought child labor laws to ensure that nobody can learn at home, completely took away apprenticeship.
Shall I give a strange example?
Yes.
We had an area called Champapet in Hyderabad where a guy was puncturing. He is doing some repair shop में काम करता था. So as a part of our Make Every Child Educated as a literacy program में, some people brought him to the school and we witnessed his life story in front of our eyes. Okay, so he was forced to study. He completed his 10th class. He failed in intermediate. After spending 8 years in education school, he again went back to the same repair shop where he started off. Where I am not saying you should not educate them, but what is this compulsory education, modern education program? क्या करना चाहता है? And you give him an engineering degree and then make him unemployed. You pick up an employee who is employed, teach him, educate him, make him graduate, and make him unemployed. So the kind of cycle we are going through is definitely not the ideal situation for any society to become prosperous.
And I guess you may, in this whole idea, you may not have all the answers yet, but that is the whole journey of Dharmarajya, of creating alternate answers, of a nation state which defines itself.
Sure, there are not ready-made answers. But what we do have today is wonderful models. Let me put it this way, it is not that we are not even a functioning economy. We are a functioning economy. We are doing well in spite. We are the only country who withstood the deadliest of recessions in the recent past. Isn't it the case?
Yeah.
And if you observe, look at, I'll go back there, how we dealt with manpower. There is another problem in economics, how to deal with capital, how to form it. Capital formation is a big challenge. Now, let's consider this case. 2008-2009, there was a global recession.
which is the East Asian
Anglo-Axon. No,
No,
that is
sorry.
98, 99.
98. Sorry.
2008 is this US
Yeah,
led
US one, correct,
recession.
before the
Okay, mortgage
yeah, before 9/11. The one.
9. Then 2009 guy. So even all the European countries started blaming UK and US. In spite of following their models, it is your own recession which you exported or imposed on the rest of the world. And there were three countries which were least affected by this recession. One was Japan, one was Germany, the other is India. And why? As Milton Friedman said, let the free markets operate. Somehow, though the free markets operate in Japan and Germany, complete free market economy, their capital formation system is that most of their businesses are funded not by the stock markets but by the banks. So these two countries are bank-driven economies, whereas the rest of the Europe and US is a stock market-driven economy. Why I'm making this point is, so bank-led economies somehow could resist the onslaught. Then there is Bharat. What are we? We believe that we are predominantly bank-led economy, where entrepreneurs get their funding from the banks, not through the stock markets, because stock markets are not so evolved in this country. Only 2 to 3% of household savings find their way to stock markets. But it is not even the case. Only our bank bank loans to GDP ratio is around only 37%, whereas it's 150% in China, 100% in Japan. Then how could we manage our capital? It is the local people, जैसे रहते हैं कि चिट फंड चलाने वाले, रोज इंटरेस्ट पे देने वाले, एक completely informal economy. An average entrepreneur in this land, even today, does not depend much for his resources on the bank or on the stock markets. जो goodwill रहता है, and an informal economy that emerged out of this. So capital formation happens naturally within the society if you leave that society as it is. If you try to, of course, I was a big fan of demonetization, but later the results of demonetization, as we started analyzing, we are moving towards a direction where we are trying to formalize the entire economy.
Yeah.
Maybe a fruit vendor tomorrow may not have access to the kind of loan he used to get earlier at a throwaway call. So by institutionalizing, by
Even if
organizing
the interest rate was higher.
even if the interest rate is higher, he could run his show and he could repay his money immediately.
Yeah, but the people keep saying that is exploitation because you have to pay much more rates and all of that business. But at the same time, I know of organizations like Rangde, which work in the social sector, NBFCs as non-banking financial corporations, who give micro loans. And also Bandhan Bank started like just 5,000 rupees.
Yeah, the kind of measures also being made.
But their interest rates are 24%, 26%. But so I was like shocked. I thought you're like the village bania who's exploiting. But they said no, that's not the way to look at it. Imagine they take 5,000 rupees. They're only giving back 50 rupees per month in interest. That they're easily able to pay back.
Exactly. And they're getting the capital when they needed it the most.
Yes.
If you have this red tapeism, approach a bank and he asks you so many questions, by the time you get your loan back, the business is lost.
Yeah.
So it is always a trade-off, but the way we form our capital, and one more capital, today the entire world is talking about MSC,
Sorry, now I'm
multi-social
saying
capital.
that they will now have to, what we are creating is an alternative bania of the village bania in a centralized India-wide organization called Rangde, or maybe there are 10 more of them, but by killing the informal economy, you've taken the village funder, whoever funds out of the network.
Exactly. Either you are bringing them into the formal economy, and so that he cannot lend as he once used to.
Because now you have to have NBFC and all of this nonsense on top.
So this is how capital is managed in this country. Every aspect of economy was properly managed in a Dharma Rajya.
It's almost like saying that it's almost like creating high courts and supreme courts. Instead of justice delivery at the local level, now you're doing exactly for capital access also.
Exactly. You're delaying the process, you are making it more cumbersome so that he doesn't even pursue setting up a business.
I never looked at it like that. This is not the story which is ever told to us. The story that's only told to us all the time is of exploitation and all of this, right? In all Hindi films from the
That is the reason why I repeatedly use the word Dharmik Vaishya. Dharmik Vaishya is quite, because he is also scared of the Papa and Pun. We always have this Daiva Bhakti, Papa Bhiti, whereas it is the reverse in the West.
Say that, help me understand.
What in our culture, what we have is Papa Bhiti. You fear the sin, not the God. Whereas in the West, you fear the God, basically.
Ah,
God fearing people.
correct.
That
We
is
are
how
not God fearing.
No, we are not God fearing. We are God loving people.
Right.
But we are scared of the sins we commit.
Because of karmic action or whatever.
Because you believe in rebirth, someday, somewhere or the other, your karma will catch you back. So, whoever does that, okay, it is not even adharmic to get some interest for the money you lend.
Correct.
And you are helping him when he is in need and you are getting back in it.
Hmm.
And the same Vaishya who is maligned for charging so much exorbitant interest rates is the one also built temples and indirectly helping the economy.
Correct.
So we never understood this cycle properly and started applied blanket rules. As a result, we landed here.
And imagine
Now-
if free markets were allowed to access there and non-government interference and creating artificial NBFCs and banks. Then while they may also exist, the local Vaishya who's a local money lender at a high interest rate is also allowed to exist
He's
without
also
government interference.
Of course.
The moment he is allowed to exist, free market economics or competitiveness will allow him, will make him keep his interest rate
Exactly.
low.
Anyway, the borrower will go to the
Whoever
place
is
where
offering the best price.
less interest.
Wonderful. See what brainwashing all of us have been through, including
Because we
me.
have not studied this properly, Rahul. I'm not saying the entire discourse has always been happening whether to how to make a particular policy successful instead of looking into whether that policy itself is good enough or not. We are in a democratic country, we are here, we are forced to make democracy successful instead of asking whether democracy by its nature is good or bad, at least to us. The same is the case with all the theories we imported. But at least let's put it this way, whether these theories did good to the countries which vouched for them, which practiced them, is it the case? They definitely did not.
If
And
we
what kind of societies they created all this? Just imagine, I'll give you an example. These are the very people who preach us today, right? You have a very scrupulous social order system where one particular section is exploited by the other. And did we ever think into the roots of it? I mean, see, how we started looking at our own society is through the lens of the West.
Western.
Because in the West, they also had this fourfold system. Just as we have Brahmana, Vaishya, Kshatriya and Shudra, they had the church, the king, the landlord, the peasant. There are 4 sections.
Yeah.
In India also we have 4 sections.
Yeah.
So there, the 3 sections are elite minority. There are very few people exploiting the majority.
Yeah.
The same might have happened here too.
They looked at us.
They looked
saying
at our
us
society.
that,
The
"Oh, it's
fourth
the
class
same thing."
might have been exploited because it happened in our country.
Our countries. Yeah.
The same lens we adopted. And what actually, throughout their evolution, in spite of their evolution, how the West stood. I have read a book called Leo Huberman ka Man's Worldly Goods. Man's Worldly Goods. There he mentions 2 examples that sums up the entire story. And these are the people who are preaching us today how to behave civilized way. Okay. There was an ad in a paper called Charleston Courier. This is not in 6th century, 7th century BC or AD. This advertisement appeared in 1828 in a prominent London daily, Charleston Courier, wherein a landlord makes an advertisement. I have a family. I have a family consisting of a woman 39-year-old, her daughter 16-year-old, her son 14-year-old. I have this family for sale. Interested parties can buy this either whole or piecemeal. So this is the kind of dominance, the kind of society they have created in spite of their evolution from slave to employee. Have you ever seen such cases in this land? And the kind of atrocities that have happened on the 4th class in those countries never happened in this country. And we could always create a happy society, but for some exceptional cases, exceptions can never make.
Very good. We will call it a day here. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
talking to me and to the viewers and sharing the ideas of cultural economy. I feel a little bit validated. I was thinking, a little scared that all my new evolved ideas of free markets would be thrown in the dustbin. They are not. They sort of exist in parallel, I'm understanding, but in the context by the bracketing of dharma and moksha, if as Kapilji
Exactly.
says it,
As the guiding forces.
as the guiding forces, the two banks.
And in fact, it has always been our idea. We do not discard the previous idea in order to build a new one.
New one.
We build on what actually is there. That is how it happened in this country. If Sankhya is refuted, Sankhya is refuted, but most principles of Sankhya have taken as they are and built by Vedanta. So we need not discard the previous one in order to posit the new one.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Hopefully you all learned a lot in this. If any one of you want to participate in the Dharma Rajya project, you may write to us at Saryu Trust. There will obviously be a vetting process. It requires a lot of commitment, lot of reading of our texts, and this is not something that you do as a just volunteer as a side hobby. It will have to be really serious, and there has to be a level of academics, of pursuing academics and pursuit of reading scriptures. Only there's going to be a selection process for Shankarji to induct more team members into the team. So hopefully you will enjoy these sessions. We'll do many more of these in the upcoming weeks and months, and keep building on these. Not only me, but the entire Dharma Rajya team talking to each other, and hopefully a lot more of our people team members talking to each other for clarifying these ideas of Dharma Rajya. Thank you very much.